Welcome to Calvary Church. Thank you all for coming today. We have perhaps the greatest problem a priest has. Oh wait, let us make a really big deal about all the new chairs we have to bring in because there's so many people coming into the room. So we're delaying just a bit so everybody can come in. We're very pleased today to later dedicate the new Fred Rogers window. As our panel is coming up here, what we intend to do is share some of the stories behind the scenes. What it was like to work with Fred Rogers, being on the set, what they learned, how they grew, and most of all, we want to open this up for questions from you. While they're gathering, I said briefly yesterday, Paula is here, wonderful, she's our preacher at 11. She won't be on the panel because she has to go and prepare to preach before too long here at 11, but gave a wonderful talk yesterday and shared a lot of her story. At that, I said that I had never been to Pittsburgh before, but when I moved here, I felt immediately comfortable and like I was home, and I couldn't figure out why. And then I realized it's because my entire idea of what a city is supposed to be was shaped by that show. I'm 55 years old, so David said I'm part of the first generation or first wave of people who grew up watching Mr. Rogers every single day. So to me, a city was either Brooklyn for Sesame Street or it's Pittsburgh for Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. I have, by the way, in my office, a little miniature, it's made of balsa wood, I'm sure an intern made it, that was on the set of the opening scene of the neighborhood, and it's of Calvary Church, and that's been sitting in my office for 12 years. I commandeered that from our parish archives. Doesn't belong to me, it belongs to the church, but it's there. We have all these little gifts, and then people associated with the show and with the greater life of Pittsburgh. He is my hero. I don't talk about this so much, but it makes me proud to try, in our sense, to carry on the legacy. Those who remember what happened on October 27th, 2018, the attack on the Tree of Life, why did we welcome them here? They've been coming here for their high holidays every year, pandemic aside, since then, because they're our neighbors. Literally 9/10 of a mile down Shady Avenue, and figuratively, there are brothers and sisters in God, same tradition and so on and so forth, but they're the people that we meet on the street, the people we serve, and that's why another reason that we continue to do that. Would anyone like to begin to share a story?
We should introduce.
Say your.
Oh, okay. My name is David Newell, and on the I get one of these?
Yeah.
Okay.
Talk like you're in a big room full of older people who don't hear as well.
I'm part of that group.
There you go.
My name is David Newell, and on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood for these many years, I've played Mr. McFeely, the speedy delivery man. And by the way, the name McFeely, thank you, but I think everything that comes out of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood really comes through Fred. I think we all pass through Fred. At any rate, McFeely is his middle name, and the real Mr. McFeely was his grandfather, his mother's father. Yes, that would make so he's the real Mr. McFeely. But how the McFeely name came to be, when I first met Fred, I had not ever met him. I knew who he was because he was on television locally. But I was in London in 1967 visiting my cousin, and I got a telegram from a former member of the church. His name was Bob McCulley. I don't know if some of you may remember Bob McCulley. He was a performer and a writer in Pittsburgh. To make a long story short, he knew Fred, and he knew Fred was taking the program nationally, and he sent me a telegram saying, I've made an appointment with you to meet Fred Rogers on such and such a day. So I came back to Pittsburgh, met Fred, and at the old WQED building, which is now Pitt's Music School, and we sat at a long table, and he was across from me, and he didn't say a word about the job. I was coming to be the in charge of props and costumes and so forth. That was to be my job. And we talked. He asked me all about what I did on my trip through Europe, and he said his favorite trip to one of his trips was after he finished theological school, he went to Egypt, and he talked about that. And after about an hour, it was an hour, he said, well, when can you start? And that was Fred's way of interviewing me. He was finding out, can I work with this guy? And I think he thought he could. And then he said, oh, here are the scripts, take them and we'll meet next week and we'll talk about the props that we need, etc. He said, oh, before you leave, I want you to play a part in the program. I've written in a part of a delivery man, and I want you to play it. And I said, oh, fine. And his name is Mr. McCurdy. That's his name. That's what my name was to be. Because Mr. McCurdy was the president of the Sears Roebuck Foundation that gave us the money to produce the program. And Fred was really saying, thank you for giving us the money. So I was all set to go. We're going to tape. The puppets had their clothes on. I had my uniform on. We're all set to go. A phone rang in the control room. It was for Fred. It was Mr. McCurdy calling to wish us well. And he said, we like the concept, and we wish you well on your first day of taping, etc. And he said, oh, by the way, please don't call the delivery man Mr. McCurdy. And I think they thought it may be too self-serving. So Fred came in, he walked right up to me, and he said, we have to get you a new name. And he said, before he even finished the sentence, he said, McFeely. That's who you are. You're now Mr. McFeely. And I think the McCurdy, MC, and the MC and McFeely clicked. So that's how Mr. McFeely was born. Then we did our first program, or close to the first program, and my first delivery, though, was an armadillo, which had something to do with the theme of the show. And we watched the armadillo for a while. I said, I have to get it back to the zoo, Mr. Rogers, and put it back in its cage, etc. And as I was leaving, the script said, say goodbye, or whatever it said. And instead of saying that, I turned around to Fred and said, speedy delivery, Mr. Rogers. And Fred said, speedy delivery, Mr. McFeely, and off I went. And that was my first day of taping Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and how I got involved in it in a very abbreviated version of that. But I think it gives you an idea. And you know something, there's a saying that, and I'll see if I get this right, I quote it all the time, I never get it exactly right. When you're choosing your field or your career or what you're gonna do for a job, make sure it's something you love, because you'll never work a day in your life. Now, that's a little corny, but it's true. I've never worked a day in my life working for Fred, and this is my over 35 years we've done it, haven't we? Something like that. So anyhow, that's my little introduction. So again, I'll finish it all up here by saying, and there'll be questions later, but we have to hear from the rest of the panel here. So now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to count to 3, and you all are going to say speedy delivery. 1, 2, 3.
Speedy delivery.
Thank you. There you go.
Since you've just heard from Mr. McFeely, you really should now hear from Mrs. McFeely. Our very own Elizabeth Seamans.
She said, explain this.
I just have to say, I've never heard that story from David. So storytelling is so great. I told a story yesterday about how Fred and I met, so I think I won't go there again. But actually, David just reminded me of a story. Fred famously, and I think someone said yesterday, how patient he was. And he was unbelievably patient. he was also unbelievably impatient, just for the record. And there's a Mr. Rogers cadre in this room, including Margie Whitmer and Hedda Sharapan right in the front row, who were just the center of everything, along with David, much more than me. He struggled with it, but he could be really impatient. And David reminded me of a day that we used to travel the United States to do the so-called Mr. Rogers Days. And we would go to the public stations all over the country. We went to South Dakota, we went to Los Angeles, all over. And we were in the Seattle airport, and there was a luggage cart that was piled high with my luggage, David's luggage, Betty Aberlin's luggage, Fred's luggage, and he was pushing it through the airport after, during an arduous trip. And he turned to me and he said, "Why am I the one who has to push this darn cart?" And I thought to myself, probably because you insisted and you expected somebody else to say that they would do it, but nobody did. And I said, "Would you like me to push it?" He said, "Yes, I would." And so I pushed the cart for a while, and we got to the gate, and we sat down together, and he turned to me and he said, "I just want you to know that it's only because I trusted you so much that I could be so angry with you." And unfortunately, at age 24, 25, whatever, I said, "Well, maybe you should trust me a little less." But that was also because we were really close and we could do that together. But that's my tale, so Joe.
Hi, good morning. I'm Joe Seamans, married to Mrs. McFeely here.
Two husbands.
Actually, I filmed their wedding. Is Margie? Yeah, Margie knows. Yeah, I filmed McFeely's wedding. It was pretty interesting. My first involvement with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, this is a short, kind of amusing story. I walked in the studio. I was visiting Pittsburgh, hoping to get a job, and visiting Elizabeth, and she said, "Well, come in the studio." So, and I was welcomed immediately. Fred said, "Hi, I'm glad you're here." Somebody said, "We need somebody to blink the stoplight at the beginning of the show. Could you go back there when I tell you, put on a headset, and just start turning the light on and off, at the very beginning of the show?" So I was like, man, I'm in show business now. This is great. And so they said, "Do it." Okay, I did it. Stop. Okay, fine. Okay, so that was my first job. Second job was a couple of days later, I ran into David Newell. He said, "You have a van, right?" Because I had kind of an old beat-up van I was driving. I said, "Yeah." I said, "Well," Dave was in charge of props. He said, "Well, I'll give you $20 if you can go pick up a llama over at the zoo." So, I was new to the city. I didn't know where the zoo was, but someone told me, "You go to Highland Avenue, and pretty soon you'll find the zoo." So anyway, long story short, I'm driving back to trying to find QED with a llama in the back of my van. And I get in Penn Circle, and I start driving around Penn Circle, and this involves Sears Roebuck, but yeah, because I kept passing Sears again and again, and I go, okay, this isn't, okay, I got to figure out how to get out of here and find QED. Finally, I got to QED, backed up the van walked the llama into the studio, and that was the second job. So, but one that I remember, which has always stuck with me, well, my job eventually became filming the remotes when Fred would go out and visit somewhere, find out how a zipper is made or crayons or whatever. This was a visit to the aquarium, the Pittsburgh Aquarium. And my job was, I was behind the camera, was to make sure everybody looked good and everything was lit properly and so on. And there was a scene where they were walking, Fred and the director of the aquarium were going to walk along and look at various tanks of fish and end up at the penguins, I think. But he wanted to see the fish being fed And I wanted to make sure that it all looked great, so we did a rehearsal with Fred, not with Fred, where I asked the guy to go up behind the tank and feed the fish. And it looked beautiful. The food came down and the fish were darting around and eating the food and everything. It's going to be perfect. Okay, so we're ready to go, right? So there's a long take where Fred is talking to the guy and they're looking at all the different fish. And then the guy says, well, it's time for the fish to eat, Fred. Would you like to watch? And Fred says, sure. So I'm ready. The camera's rolling. So the food comes down in the tank. And the fish look at it, and the food keeps on drifting down. And then it finally sits at the bottom of the tank, and the fish are looking at the food, and then they just sort of go away. And I thought, I've really messed this up with this rehearsal. Oh my gosh. And Fred said to the director said to Fred, I'm not sure whether or not eating. And Fred said, I don't think the fish are hungry. Let's keep on going. Okay? So, there's a person I work with who was on that shoot, and years later, even today, this is a story having to do with expectations and what actually happens, And it's sometimes we have these great expectations of what we're going to be filming, and it doesn't turn out that way. And we look at each other and say, I guess the fish aren't hungry, So that's a small thing that a moment that Fred was very helpful to me in understanding the nature of life, basically. So.
Okay, I'm Charles Altman, and I played Prince Tuesday for a number of years on the show. And you never saw me because I was under the castle. And Joe, could you get that folder that's on the windowsill? It's a picture of Prince Tuesday and myself. It's the only evidence I have of having done this. And yeah. And it's me at a tender age with hair. But I had just crawled out from under the castle, having my head in Fred's armpit for the last 2 hours or something. Yeah, and so somebody snapped the photograph as I crawled out, so I'm all sweaty and everything. In any case, it was an honor to do this and to work with this man. And a studio story that I remember, and I'm sure Margie remembers, was I think it was a rehearsal. And it might have been, they were taping, I think. But Fred came in the door, and he sang the song. And he came down the steps, and he took his jacket off, and he went over to the closet to get his sweater, and he opened the door. And Nicky Tallow, the floor manager, had hung an inflatomate in the closet. And so...
Explain what an inflatomate is.
An inflatomate is an inflated maiden with all of her physical attributes hanging out. And Fred didn't miss a minute, a second. He said, "Ah, my dear." And he took her in his arms and began to waltz. And the music changed to a waltz beat, and they danced around the studio. But it's an example of how quick he was and how he was never flummoxed by anything, and even an inflatomate. But it was an honor to have worked with him, and I spent a lot of time under there. It was very crowded under the castle, and we had a monitor, or 2 monitors, I think, and black and white, little monitors. And what we had to do, which really surprised me because I'd never operated a puppet in my life, but this is Prince Tuesday's head here, and his right hand and his left hand. And so I could hold it up much higher than I can hold my hand up now. I can't reach quite that high anymore. But when you're turning to the right and you're looking at the monitor, you're turning to the left. And so to learn that and to maintain it throughout the entire script was a really hard lesson for me to learn, and I finally did, but it was pretty rough, watching, seeing your fingers go to the right and they should go to the left. And so Tuesday was off a little bit at first. He really didn't know who he was talking to most of the time. But anyway, anybody else have any comments?
Anybody have any questions about anything?
Yes.
If you have a question, please raise your hand, and I'll come over with the microphone so everybody can hear, and then we're recording this as well.
We have another microphone here, too.
Right. So this microphone will be for all of you to talk, respond, and this one will be for the people to speak. Any
You may
questions?
have a question.
I will. What questions? Yes.
Thank you. It's great to see everyone who's involved in the show that's here today. Makes me a little nervous to talk. But there's a quick story I wanted to share. I grew up watching, I'm 53, I grew up watching Mr. Rogers as a young child. My 3 children all grew up watching Mr. Rogers. And a few years ago, the Tom Hanks movie came out. And it was a big family event for us. My wife and kids all went with me, indulged my passion for the show, and we went to watch together. And as the previews are starting, there's a woman sitting right next to me, who's a little older than I am, and she's chatting with her friend on the other side. All of my family is to this side. And she won't stop talking. And I'm really looking forward to this movie. And, she'll calm down after the previews. And she's talking more as we get closer to the start of the movie. She's talking more incessantly. And it's babble. It's not anything important. Nothing that needs to be talked about just then. And I am trying to figure out in my head how I complain to my neighbor at a Fred Rogers movie without totally destroying the spirit of the film, to the point where I am literally straining my neck and clenching and doing everything I can to keep my increasing annoyance at bay. Finally, the movie starts and people are getting into it, and she's doing some commentary in the movie, and now, from what she's saying, I understand why she's talking. Because now I understand she was a production assistant on the show. And she's naming things, cameos. She's like in the restaurant scene where the producer, I think Bob, there's Bob, hi Bob. She's talking, explaining to her friend that we did this and we did that. And I'm learning so much more and I'm getting so much more out of the movie because she's sitting next to me. So the scene where the middle school girls are singing in the subway to Fred, by that point, I'm in tears, she's in tears. We spend the rest of the movie silently crying next to each other as we're watching this. And she, of course, and I, of course, we sit through the credits, the long credits showing the production scenes and everything. And I introduce myself, and she tells me her name, and I point to my 3 children, and I say, you see, these are my 3 children. Each of them is a little bit better of a human being because of the work you did on your show. And I was very happy I took that opportunity to thank her and to express that message. And I wanted to say the same to the members of the production who are in the room here today, that however much time you might have spent sweating in Fred's armpit, or other indignities that you endured for that show, that my kids are all a little bit better human beings because of the work that you did. And I know there are a lot of other people who feel the same way. The moral of the story for me, and I told my kids this afterwards when I was trying to explain why Dad was so very emotional during that film, was that I spent the whole preview of the film getting really angry at the lady who was sitting next to me, like really frustrated. And what I realized by the end of the movie was that In fact, there was nothing wrong with her, and she was perfect, just the way she was. So thank you.
Hi, I am an actor, and I'm also a puppeteer and stagehand. And we watch Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood every single morning with our daughter. We've gone back from episode 3, and we've made it pretty much all the way through. And it's really amazing, and we look forward to it every morning. But one thing that surprises me, as somebody who also works in the industry, mostly in theater though, is that he seems to roll with the mistakes. But sometimes I can't even tell if it is a mistake, because he'll hang up his sweater and it'll fall down. And then he makes it a theme through the rest of the show, to the point where I can't tell if it's something that happened in rehearsal and he decided to keep it in, or if it happened to happen right there in the moment. And that is really incredible to me. So did a lot of those things just happen in rehearsal and he kept it in, or was it a combination? Because my daughter will turn to me whenever she makes a mistake and say, Mr. Rogers says that it's okay to make mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. And it's been such a lesson on yes-anding things throughout.
Your microphone?
Oh. There was a scene once that the line was, oh, Mr. Rogers, it's lightning and thundering outside. And we were to exit at that point. And we got through this scene, and right as we were exiting, I had to say that. But instead of saying lightning and thundering, I said it's thunder, it's lundering and thightening. That's what I said. And Fred said, so his patient was a little tested then. But those things happen. But so we did it all over again, because it's the very end. There's no way of editing. But we at one time kept a reel of outtakes, of goofs that people made. Oh, and one time, we had mics like this for years, and you had to attach them to yourself, and the cord would attach somewhere. And Betsy had to go to the McFeely door to see Mr. Rogers out, and she didn't quite realize that. You remember don't you remember that? Well, no. Well, this is another one. You stopped short because the mic wouldn't let you go any farther. So that was an outtake. So we had a whole reel of these outtakes, and they're fun to look at. But any other questions for anybody? Oh.
Well, the other microphone story. I mean, we're just like telling tall tales from the studio. Okay. The story I thought David's going to tell one of two stories, and I'll just allude to one, which was because of the bloopers reel that Dick Clark did. Don't you remember Dick Clark? He used to have a bloopers reel, and he used to love to show Mr. Rogers bloopers on his blooper reel. But the thing I thought David was saying was in the very, very early days when our microphones were wired into the wall, in other words, just plugged in, it was my job as Mrs. McFeely to turn on the projector to show one of his Funny Fast films. And there was a short in the projector, and every time I turned on the projector, I got a massive shock through my chest because there was an electrical failure in the projector. And I'll just say that I tried to, show must go on, and so I was dreading each take. And before I touched the projector, I'd say, 1, 2, 3, and then it would, the movie would start, and I would get a jolt. And finally, the engineer came up and realized what was going on, and he said, "We could have killed you with this one, but they didn't." And but the other one was the blooper that I was in most, or that was shown the most, was a chimpanzee who came to this. His name was Jay. Yeah. His name was Jay, and he came from the zoo. And I had written the script, and I had always wanted a chimpanzee and wanted to write one in. And so it turned out that an adolescent chimpanzee is very, very dangerous, which, who knew? I guess the people in the zoo must have known, but they sent him over anyway. And he was climbing everywhere. He was eating the plastic trees on the set. He was tearing everything up. And the man from the zoo who came with him said, just a minute, I'll get him to calm down. And so he would take him behind the set, and he would hit him with a 2x4. And when we realized this, we were like, this is not Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Having this chimpanzee hit with a 2x4. But it was finally when he climbed up under my skirt that I said, no, we're not going to do this anymore.
But then the final thing was he bit you.
Yes, and then he bit me, but anyway. So we had a lot of fun on this set. I have to say, I've now told two stories that tend towards the dark. One about impatience and one about being bitten by animals. And I know you all know this, but the patience that he did have and the understanding that he offered to each of us and the listening and the caring is what I remember. And these other things are fun stories to tell because they go counter to type. But the reality was, I mean, how did we get so lucky, right?
I remember, did you wear a long skirt with pockets and it had things in it? Did you wear a long skirt with pockets and had things in it kids could get, or am I remembering that from something else?
You're remembering that from the Shady Lane Fair.
From where?
Well, I used to be the pocket lady at the
yes,
Shady
you were the
Lane
pocket
Fair,
lady.
and that was something that came to me from Joe's mother, that the children could pay 25 cents and pull a toy out of my pocket. But it was sort of Mrs. McFeely-ish.
Yeah.
I just wondered what the gentleman at the end of the line contributed to this show.
He's our friend who wanted to join us, and we were happy that he's with us.
Oh.
I've got that long microphone now. Thank you. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and all of you did such a great job of leading through change as a child, watching your show, and now having children who have watched your show. We are in a point where there's lots of opportunity, we'll call it that, to lead through change, lots of social issues, lots of things happening. Did you as a group, and you did such a nice job, ever have differences of direction in how you were going to lead us, and how did you get through some of those differences?
Differences in direction, they ask you to do something and you wanted to do it another way or something.
Oh, ask us to do something we didn't want to do it? Is that
The differences of how you were going to write the scripts and the change leadership that you really brought to all of us.
You mean something was written in the script and we didn't like it?
I think I understand that question. I think the question is, since there was a sense of change and a sense of movement in the scripts, did we ever not agree with where he was going with the work or with the script?
And how did you handle that as a group?
Yeah.
Such a good job.
I have to say that we were so on, Margie had David agree or disagree, but I believe we were all so on board, and he was really, this is overstating it, but somewhat prophetic in his ability to lead. And so I know I had lots of disagreements with him about how to get to that goal, but I don't remember any of us disagreeing about where the program was going or what the intention of the work was. Margie?
I remember once, when...
This is the producer of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Would you please stand up, Margie?
Oh, it's so little. So I remember once when women were starting to go back to work, and they weren't staying home. They weren't able to stay home with their kids. And one of Fred's things was he'd love to have parents watch the program with their children, and that the best situation is to have the intact family be at home, that there was always somebody at the house when the kids were little. So I remember having a really long conversation with him about doing a week on childcare. And I said, I remember, I don't know where it came from in me, but I remember saying, Fred, don't you want them to get the best care possible? That they don't just leave their kids with the next door neighbor because they're next door. So that it wasn't like a bad argument. I just was interested in reminding him that he had the resources and the knowledge and the care for kids to convince. We could put out some good programs with that. So it took a while, but he came around. I think everybody was behind me on that too. So then I spoke up.
Other questions? Regina?
Thanks. This is just from the point of view of a parent. I had a child who didn't like to take a bath, and Mr. Rogers sang a song, "You'll never go down, you'll never go down, you'll never go down the drain," and he decided it was okay for him to take a bath.
I'm going to go back to what Jonathan was talking about as Mr. Rogers as a neighbor and the whole idea of neighborhood. I remember once I lived a few houses away from the Sixth Presbyterian Church where he went. And one day I was in my house and my dog was out in the yard barking and barking and barking. And then his barking got less, and I went out and there was Fred Rogers hanging over the fence talking to my dog very softly about being a good neighbor. But then this whole sort of fits into what Mary Jane said. When my older daughter was 3, she used to watch Sesame Street so I could cook dinner. And all of a sudden she wouldn't watch Sesame Street, and it turned out she was terrified of Count Von Count. So I shifted her over to Mr. Rogers. And I did watch with her a couple of times to make sure this was a good babysitter, and loved it. And Rebecca watched Mr. Rogers every night for about 2 years. And then 13 or 14 years later, she went off to college with a T-shirt that said, "I live in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood" on it. And friends came to her and said, "Sure." Ha! She said, I do. And it was just good. The neighborhood continued.
Other questions? We've got time for one more.
I have one little story to tell. At one point, a new program series was being prepared called Old Friends, New Friends. And it was it was Fred dealing with adults. And I don't know that it was done, it lasted very long, but I was at one point art director to do the openings and closings, like the Masterpiece Theater thing, of Fred talking to the camera about what the interview was going to be. And I also was working on his wardrobe because Fred was nearsighted. He was colorblind. And so I picked out the ties and the shirts and sweaters and jackets and whatnot. And that all worked fine. And that Christmas, I got a package from Fred, and it was a necktie. And it was a bright yellow brocade woven patterned necktie. I wouldn't have been caught dead in the bathroom in that tie. In any case, I thanked him, and I said, Fred, you know, the only thing you could use to accessorize or wear with this tie is a shoulder holster. And he laughed and laughed and laughed and loved that. So anyway, he had a great sense of humor.
I'll tell one quick one. It was Fred and I and Johnny Costa, our musician, were eating lunch at Stouffer's restaurant. Remember Stouffer's? It's now part of PNC or UPMC. At any rate, we were eating lunch, and there was a long table with about 20 women with little packages in front of them, presents. They were waiting for a surprise guest. The birthday girl was on her way, but she didn't have any idea that it was going to be a surprise party. So we were sitting there, and she came in, and she saw this, and she screamed at her friend. She said, I told you I hate surprise parties. And the whole Stouffer's could hear. We were just bug-eyed, just listening to all this. We couldn't, and she was berating him and berating them, and they were all looking down at their plates. And finally she said, well, I'm here, I might as well sit and eat. And then, so we took all of this in, and the rest of the lunch, not a word was said, and we felt so sorry for the rest of the women who were sitting there, because this one woman had been so furious. But in a way, it was very sad, but in another way, it was very funny. Well, in a sad, funny way. But all of these stories that keep popping in as you were telling them, but oh, one more, just one more. Hedda can help me on this one. X the Owl was very sad one day, and this was in the script. He had lost the ball, I believe, in this course of the script. And Betty Aberlin came up, and X was crying because he lost the ball. This is part of the script. And I think the line was, well, what's the matter, X? But Betty ad-libbed and said, don't cry, X, everything will be all right. And Fred stopped immediately. He came from behind the tree, and he said, we can't say don't cry, because that's really denying an emotion. And I think you said that you make me uncomfortable when you cry. Isn't that something like that? But that was such a lesson. That Fred was so particular, or that could have just gone on, and probably no one would have really noticed it, but Fred did. And that's how particular he was with what went out on the air for children. And I think yesterday we mentioned the holy, I don't know if you were here, the space between the child at home and the TV screen is holy ground. And people who produce programs for children have that responsibility to do the best they can. That's my little 2 cents.
It's about $1.50, I think.
$1.50.
We got one last question, then we'll wrap it up.
Well, it's a little bit of a statement. I do a newsletter every week for my nonprofit, and I have a section in there featuring Fred Rogers and what his mother told him to always look for helpers. So throughout all the stories that I tell, there's always a section on Fred saying, remember the helpers, and then I link to the YouTube video where he recalls his mother telling them that whenever there's a tragedy and the police and the fire come, always look for the helpers and look for the good in everybody. So even though it's years after Fred's been gone, I still invoke him in my newsletters every single week. He's a little feature. So
Yeah, that's a classic story.
yeah, that's a good lesson for everybody. Always look for the helpers.
Thank you all. You have helped.
I just want to add a commercial that you can see Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood on Pluto Streaming. It's available there. It's also available on pbskids.org, and Hedda has a suggestion.
We did a legacy website with video bits and understanding of what is underneath the videos. MrRogers.org. MrRogers.org, with video bits and the treasured videos and an explanation of what was the messages behind it. And there's also a place where we put a whole week of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and we leave it there for 2 weeks. It's in that same MrRogers.org.
You've helped create holy ground between you and us by being here. We really appreciate that. I hope you've been thanked numerous times throughout your ministry and life. But what I've realized is I've always known how foundational the show was to me, and I always wanted to thank Mr. Rogers and to thank you, and I never got the opportunity, and now we get to do that. May we thank them for their role in making this possible.
Thank you.